Now, from a leadership perspective, all this talk of marching and patrolling made me think of a short story called The Beloved Captain, which I was recently introduced to by the wife of one of the finest leaders I've ever worked for, a guy named General Sean McFarland, who was the colonel at the time who was commanding the 11 AD, the 1st Brigade of the 1st Armored Division, otherwise known as the Ready First, during the Battle of Ramadi. And I recently saw General McFarland's wife at a memorial event that we did for the 10-year anniversary of Mark Lee's death. And she told me about this story. Again, it's called The Beloved Captain, and it lays out some fundamental leadership principles. And when the general's wife told me that he kind of referred to this story himself for guidance, I figured maybe it'd be the kind of guidance we could all use. And the story is written by a guy named Donald Hankey, who served with the British Army in World War I. A volunteer who enlisted at age 29. Despite having served as an officer when he was younger, he enlisted to go fight, and he eventually regained his commission. And in both as a enlisted guy and as an officer, he fought on the front lines. And he wrote this story, which is called, as I said, The Beloved Captain. He came in the early days when we were still at recruit drills under hot September sun. Tall, erect, smiling. So we first saw him, and so he remained to the end. At the start, he knew as little of soldiering as we did. He used to watch us being drilled by the sergeant, but his manner of watching was peculiarly his own. He never looked bored. He was learning just as much as we were. In fact, more. He was learning his job, and from the first, he saw that his job was more than to give us the correct orders. His job was to lead us. So he watched and noted many things and never found the time hang on heavy on his hands. He watched our evolutions so as to learn the correct orders. He watched for the right manner of command, the manner which secured the most prompt response to an order. And he watched every one of us for our individual characteristics. We were his men. Already, he took an almost paternal interest in us. He noted the men who tried hard, but were naturally slow and awkward. He distinguished them from those who were inattentive and bored. He marked down the keen and most efficient among us. Most of all, he studied those who were subject to moods, who were sulky one day and willing the next. These were the ones who were to turn the scale. If he could get these on his side, the battle would be won. So here's this leader. Very important for him to learn about his men and know his men and study his men. We have heard this before. Back to the book. For the first few days, he just watched. Then he started work. He picked out some of the most awkward ones and, accompanied by a corporal, marched them away by themselves. Ingenuously, he explained that he did not know much himself yet, but he thought that they might get on better if they drilled by themselves a bit, and that if he helped them and they helped him, they would soon learn. So there's some serious humility going on there. He's like, hey, I don't know that much. You guys don't know that much. Let's help each other. Let's build a little team here. His confidence was infectious. He looked at them, and they looked at him, and the men pulled themselves together and determined to do their best. So he formed relationships here. Their best surprised themselves. His patience was inexhaustible. His simplicity could not fail to be understood. He's keeping things simple, so simple that they could not fail to be understood. His keenness and optimism carried all with them. Very soon the awkward squad found themselves awkward no longer, and soon after that they ceased to be a squad and went back to the platoon. Then he started to drill the platoon, with the sergeant standing by to point out his mistakes. Of course he made mistakes, and when that happened, he never minded admitting it. Some extreme ownership going on. He would explain what mistakes he had made and try again. The result was that we began to take almost as much interest and pride in his progress as he did in ours. We were his men and he was our leader. We felt that he was a credit to us, and we resolved to be a credit to him. There was a bond of mutual confidence and affection between us, which grew stronger and stronger as the months passed. He had a smile for almost everyone, but we thought he had a different smile for us. We looked for it and were never disappointed. On parade, as long as we were trying, his smile encouraged us. Off parade, if we passed him and saluted, his eyes looked straight into our own, and his smile greeted us. It was a wonderful thing, that smile of his. It was something worth living for and worth working for. It bucked one up when one was bored or tired. It seemed to make one look at things from a different point of view, a finer point of view, his point of view. There was nothing feeble or weak about it. It was not monotonous like the smile of Sunny Jim. It meant something. It meant that we were his men and that he was proud of us and sure that we were going to do jolly well, better than any of the other platoons. And it made us determined that we would. When we failed him, when he was disappointed in us, he did not smile. He did not rage or curse. He just looked disappointed. And that made us feel far more savage with ourselves than any amount of swearing would have done. It's a point we've talked about on here many times. That guy that's yelling and screaming, not getting respect.
That has a lot to do also, actually probably everything to do also with, remember who we were talking about, use the carrot, not the stick, the
absolutely.
reward. So that's basically, on top of the bond, or it could be kind of the same thing where when they look for that approval, which we all do with our friends, especially, they're not looking to avoid him getting mad. They're looking to make him happy. Absolutely. Because of that, how that feels or how good that is. So he doesn't have to get mad. He just has to basically go to 0. He doesn't have to go -10 on him. Yeah. He goes to 0 or 1. They're like, dang. I'm going to get back to that 10.
Yeah, and it's such great language. He just looked disappointed, and that made us feel far more savage with ourselves than any amount of swearing would have done.
Yep.
And I had a boss like that one time. Our whole goal in life was just to make him look good and have him say, give us a smile and be like, hey, good job. And we were all fired up.
Yep.
Back to the book. He made us feel that we were not playing the game with him. This is if they messed up. He made us feel that we were not playing the game by him. It was not what he said. He was never very good at talking. It was just how he looked. And his look of displeasure and disappointment was a thing that we would do anything to avoid. The fact was that he had won his way into our affections. We loved him. And there isn't anything stronger than love when all's said and done. He was humble too, if that is the right word, and I think it is. No trouble of ours was too small for him to attend to. When we started route marches, for instance, and our feet were blistered and sore, as they often were at first, you would have thought that they were his own feet from the trouble he took. Of course, after the march, there was always an inspection of feet. That is routine, but with him, it was no mere routine. He came into our rooms, and if anyone had a sore foot, he would kneel down on the floor and look at it as carefully as if he had been a doctor. Then he would prescribe, and the remedies were ready at hand, being borne by the sergeant. If a blister had to be lanced, he would very likely lance it himself then and there, so as to make sure that it was done with a clean needle and that no dirt was allowed to get in. There was no affectation about this, no striving after effect. It was simply that he felt that our feet were pretty important and that he knew that we were pretty careless. So he thought it best at the start to see to the matter himself. Nevertheless, there was in our eyes something almost religious about this care for our feet. It seemed to have a touch of the Christ about it, and we loved and honored him the more. Literally getting down on his hands and knees and caring for the feet of his men. And you can imagine the leaders that would see this as being beneath them, and maybe even thinking in some way that this would make them look bad.
Right.
But you can see, obviously, he's comparing him to Jesus. So I think it had a good effect on the men.
I think so.
We knew that we should lose him. For one thing, we knew that he would be promoted. It was our great hope that someday he would command the company. Also, we knew that he would be killed. He was so amazingly unself-conscious. For that reason, we knew that he would be absolutely fearless. He would be so keen on the job in hand and so anxious for his men that he would forget about his own danger. So it proved. He was a captain when we went out to the front. Whenever there was a tiresome job to be done, he was there in charge. If ever there were a moment of danger, he was on the spot. If there were any particular part of the line where the shells were falling faster or the bombs dropping more thickly than in other parts, he was in it. It was not that he was conceited and imagined himself indispensable. It was just that he was so keen that the men should do their best and act worthily of the regiment. He knew that fellows hated turning out at night for fatigue when they were in a rest camp. He knew how tiresome the long march there and back and digging in the dark for an unknown purpose were. He knew that the fellows would be inclined to grouse and shirk, so he thought that it was up to him to go and show them that he thought it was a job worth doing. And the fact that he was there put a new complexion on the matter altogether. No one would shirk if he was there. No one would grumble so much either. What was good enough for him was good enough for us. So you gotta get out there. And I've told stories about picking up brass and taking the bad watches, all those things. And this is a exact commentary about that. Just because you're in a leadership position doesn't mean you don't get to do the hard stuff or you don't have to do the hard stuff. It actually means you do the hard stuff.
Bro, I was talking to Jade a few days ago, and he's the boss of his company and stuff. And man, pretty much every word that's coming from that is like, man, it's reminding me of this, where like there's certain people in a group that can do that can go and like, they'll wash your shoes, and you don't automatically have that respect. In some cases, you'll have less respect if like, sure, like they're kissing your butt and they don't have anything to look up to, or these kind of guys or whatever. But the point is, as the leader or the boss or the dad or whatever, like everyone in the group is watching you. People are watching. Sure. So if you're like, you can be like, hey, you can make 10, 20, 50 great moves. And then, but let's say you just kind of come in late every day or something like that, or like you're undisciplined or something. Yeah, they're watching. So they're like, okay, I see that. And they're not being critical necessarily. They're just watching.
Or are they?
I'm sure. I mean, it can go conscious or even subconscious. They could be getting critical, but man, they're watching. So when you're like, if they see you slack off, they're like,
it's okay to slack off.
Yeah, all right, okay, that's what we're doing.
You're
kinda,
leading.
You know,
if you're from a leadership position, you're slacking. Your followers are going to slack. There's no doubt about it. Let there be no doubt.
Yeah, you lose your temper, or even if like you think no one's paying attention, you like, your kid is cruising with you or whatever. You're on the phone with, I don't know, the cable guy. And you know how they schedule between these two, and you're mad or whatever.
I'll be there between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m.
or 9 a.m. the next day or something. And you lose your temper on the cable guy. Brother, he's watching. You're like, oh, okay, that's kind of how it is. Like, that's how we do it, kind of thing, People are watching. So yeah, this guy where he's doing the hard stuff, the top level stuff. Bottom line, he's doing it all. People are watching and they see it, so they're like, "Man, that's the way to roll."
I mean, literally something that they didn't think. Digging in and moving at night and digging in, for an unknown purpose. He knew that they weren't fired up. As soon as he showed up and started doing it, they all realized, okay, if it's good enough for him,
that's how we're rolling.
It's good enough for us. And they're back to the book. What was good enough for him was good enough for us. If it were not too much trouble for him to turn out, it was not too much trouble for us. He knew, too, how trying to the nerves it is to sit in a trench and be shelled. He knew what a temptation there is to move a bit farther down the trench and herd together in a bunch at what seems the safest end. He knew, too, the folly of doing it, and that it was not the thing to do, not done in the best regiments. So he went along to see that it did not happen, to see that the men stuck to their posts and conquered their nerves. And as soon as we saw him, we forgot our own anxiety. It was, "Move a bit further down, sir. We are all right here. But don't you go exposing yourself." We didn't matter. We knew it then. We were just rank and file, bound to take risks. The company would get along all right without us. But the captain, how was the company to get on without him? To see him was to catch his point of view, to forget our personal anxieties and think only of the company and the regiment and honor. That's an interesting concept, is that this leader's presence actually opened his troopers' minds to what he saw.
Yep.
That's awesome. There was not one of us but would gladly have died for him. We longed for the chance to show him that. We weren't heroes. We never dreamed about getting the Victoria Cross. But to save the captain, we would have earned it 10 times over, and never have cared a button whether we got it or not. We never got the chance. Worse luck. It was all the other way. We were holding some trenches which were about as unhealthy as trenches could be. The Boches, which is a slang term for the Germans, the Boches were only a few yards away and were well supplied with trench mortars. We hadn't got any at the time. Bombs and air torpedoes were dropping round us all day. Of course, the captain was there. It seemed as if he could not keep away. A torpedo fell into the trench and buried some of our chaps. The fellows next to them ran to dig them out. Of course, he was the first one. Then came another torpedo in the same place. That was the end. But he lives. Somehow he lives. And we who knew him do not forget. We feel his eyes on us. We still work for that wonderful smile of his. There are not many of the old lot left now, but I think those who went west have seen him. When they got to the other side, I think they were met. Someone said, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And as they knelt before that gracious pierced figure, I reckon they saw nearby the captain's smile. Anyway, in that faith, let me die, if death should come my way. And so, I think, shall I die content. And die he did. Donald Hankey, who wrote that story, was badly wounded in the Battle of Ypres on July 30th, 1915, and after recovering from those wounds, he went back to the front, including action at the Battle of the Somme, and later preparing to go over the top at 1:30 in the afternoon on October 12th, 1916. Lieutenant Hankey was reported to have told his men, if wounded, Blighty. If killed, resurrection. And Blighty was a term that basically meant $1 million wound, which we've talked about before on this podcast. The $1 million wound is, hey, you get shot, it gets you off the front, but it doesn't kill you and it doesn't maim you for life. Mm-hmm. It's $1 million wound, and that the Brits called that a Blighty. And so at 1:30 in the afternoon on October 12th, as his guys are getting ready to go over the top, he tells his men, if wounded, Blighty, if killed, resurrection. So you boys have nothing to fear. Shortly thereafter, he was killed. He is said to have been buried near the spot where he fell, although the grave was never found. But we do have his words. So let us heed those words as we try to lead others as well as he did, as well as we can, as well as the beloved captain.